Class, in yesterday's lesson, we specifically talked about the 1940s and how the government had to raise money for World War II. We talked about Captain America and how he inspired patriotism. He was our first pop culture item that we learned from the 1940s. And we talked about war bonds and advertisements and how the government gets the word out about what they need to be able to support the war effort. Today, what we're going to do is we're going to finish our second half of our lesson for the 1940s. We're going to learn two pop culture items today, and we're going to get our Utah history tie-in for the 1940s. So let's go ahead and start with our lesson objectives. I can connect the events of the 1940s, World War II, with the pop culture of that time period. I can analyze the effectiveness and evaluate the morality of internment camps. Let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so our second pop culture item, and our first is of course Captain America. Our second is going to be M&Ms. M&Ms were first invented and sold in the 1940s. So let me give you some of the background and how this actually ties in to World War II. All right, so M&Ms were first created by the Mars and Murray Company, which is how it gets its name, M&M, in March of 1941. Now, America doesn't enter World War II until December 1941. So at first, what happened in March all the way until December is M&Ms were just sold regularly in stores for anyone to buy who wanted to buy chocolate. So what they would do is they were actually sold in these cardboard tubes, and then you could just buy one of the tubes, and then you'd have your M&Ms inside that. Now, of course, they didn't have all the fancy M&M flavors we have today. Like there was no pretzel or peanut butter or fudge brownie, but there was just the regular chocolate M&Ms. Well, then what happened is in December of 1941, when America went to war, chocolate was no longer available for your average American to consume at the store. If you went to the store and you wanted to buy candy, you couldn't, because the candy and the sugar was being used for the soldiers. That was part of the rationing of that time period, because the soldiers would receive a ration bag full of their meal every day, and their meals had everything they needed. So it was like protein and carbohydrates and fruits and vegetables. And they tried to give them healthy food, but then they also gave them a dessert, because our bodies do need some sugar to survive. And it's also fun. So why not? So the soldiers were given before this, they were given just chocolate. And what would happen is they would be carrying around their ration packets all day long, and then they would eat them for dinner, but then the chocolate would be all the way melted. So what happened is the government bought all the M&Ms at that time period and sent them to the soldiers, because the M&Ms didn't melt as easily as just a chocolate ball. They were more portable, and they were easier to eat because they didn't melt everywhere. Now, of course, if you hold M&Ms in your hand for like 10 minutes, your hand is going to be super colorful because they're going to melt. But because of the sugar coating, it contains the chocolate better than just a regular chocolate bar. So the soldiers were eating by 1942, they were eating M&Ms as part of their rations. And today, M&Ms are still part of soldiers' rations. Ever since the 1940s, they've been included as kind of a tradition, and also it's easier with the M&Ms as part of a soldier's rations for them to eat every day. Now, here's an advertisement on the right-hand side. You can see there's two soldiers. There's a man, there's a woman, and there's the guy holding the chocolate, the cardboard tube that they would be sold in. And you can see in the red box it says now 100% at war. So it's telling you that 100% of the M&Ms that are being produced at this time were going specifically to the soldiers. So that's actually a really cool thing about how M&Ms made it easier for the soldiers. That's our tie-in with World War II. So what I have for you is I have a video clip that will show you kind of the history of what I've already told you about M&Ms, but also it'll show you some of the really cool advertisements at that time. So it's really short, it's about a minute long, but what I want you to do right now is I want you to pause this video and I want you to watch the video clip for number 1. Okay, so at this point, you should have already watched the history overview of M&Ms, and you should have seen those advertisements I was talking about. Okay, now, before you watch video clip number 2, where we're going to move on to our next pop culture item, I want to tell you a little bit about what you're seeing. Our next pop culture item, and this will be our last one for the 1940s, is a movie that came out in the 1940s. Now, if you were to go to the movies in the 1940s, they would show you more than just a movie. If we go to the movies today, we're going to see a lot of advertisements and a lot of trailers for other movies. And they would have that kind of thing. But what they had is they had commercials and they had like the news before the movie. So you'd go and you'd watch a little clip about what was happening in the world, then your movie would start. And at this time, they had a lot of advertisements for war and for enlisting as a soldier. What they wanted to do was they wanted to make enlistment look really cool. That way, if you were really wanting to be a soldier or you were kind of on the fence, you would see some people doing some really cool things, and then you'd be like, well, I want to be a soldier, and the government would be able to have enough people as their army. So what I want you to do is I want you to view video clip number 2, because it is one of those advertisements for the Air Force. So you're going to see how the people present the Air Force in the video, and what I want you to look for is how are they presenting it so that the Air Force looks like something cool that like a lot of people are going to want to do. So go ahead and pause this video right now, and I want you to watch video clip number 2. Okay, so at this point, you should have watched video clip number 2, and you saw that advertisement. So it was in black and white, like everything was mostly at that time period. But one thing I wanted you to notice, did you hear how the music was really upbeat, and they made the Air Force look so cool, and they showed the soldiers look so proud. And of course, they're not going to show like, oh, when you go to war, you're going to see really horrible things that are going to give you PTSD, and you're going to have to kill people. They're not showing that in the commercial, but they're showing, wow, it's so cool to be a soldier, and if you're a cool guy, you'll go and enlist. So they're going to, of course, make it look that way to try to sell it. So this is an example of something you'd see before you went to a movie. Now, um, our third pop culture item is a movie called Casablanca, and this movie came out in the 1940s. It had a specific message for people in the 1940s, and what I want to do is I want to tell you a little bit about the plot of this movie, and then I want you to see if you can connect the plot of this movie and the message with what is happening at this time period. How are people going to feel when they watch this movie in the 1940s, because the director had a very clear message he wanted to give them. So this movie Casablanca, it stars this guy that you're seeing on the movie poster on the right hand side. His name is Rick. He's played by a really famous actor called Humphrey Bogart. And Rick lives in a city called Casablanca in northern Africa. Well, Rick is American, and he actually left America because he became kind of disillusioned with things in America. What that means is he kind of had a bad attitude about things and felt like things weren't going very well. So he becomes really kind of angry and cynical. And he moves to North Africa and he opens like this bar. And in his bar, people just kind of come and go. Well, the main conflict of the story happens like this. The lady that you're seeing is his old girlfriend. Well, she got married to this guy that you're kind of seeing the background right behind her. She got married to that guy, and that guy was Austrian. And she and him had to flee from Austria because Hitler was going to come and kill the husband because he opposed Hitler, and Hitler was going to come and kill him. So they end up in Casablanca, and our main character Rick runs into his old girlfriend, and he realizes he still loves her, and so it's kind of like a love triangle a little bit. But basically, the thing that she wants from Rick is she wants the papers that he has. And the papers that he has are free admission into America. So he kind of has like a green card, and he doesn't need this, but he has a hold of it so he can give it to someone that does. And she wants to have it for her and her husband. Well, the main question of this whole entire movie is this. Rick has a choice. He can do one of two things. The first thing he can do is he can decide not to give her the papers, because guess what? She said, Rick, baby, I still love you, and so let's run away together and I'll leave my husband. So that's his first choice, is he doesn't give them the papers, and then they just leave together and have a happy relationship and a happy ever after. Or the second choice is she gives the papers to them and the husband gets to come to America where he can be safe because the Americans said, okay, in this movie, they said, okay, well, we'll take him and he can be safe here. And so he would be safe from Hitler if he did that. If Rick chose the first option where he just runs away with her, then the husband isn't guaranteed to be safe. So in the end of the movie, at the very climax, Rick gets to decide, does he want to run away with her or does he want to give them the papers and the husband and her be safe in America? Which one do you think that he decides to do? I'll give you a second to think about it. Okay, so option 1 was he runs away with her, and option 2 was he gives him the papers. Well, Rick, during the whole movie, actually kind of changes his personality. He decides not to be this angry man that hates America and decides to actually have a better attitude and be more patriotic. And because he has a better attitude, he decides he doesn't want to be so selfish. And he does the unselfish thing at the end of the movie. And the unselfish thing is to give them the papers so they can both be safe. And Rick decides to give up his own happiness to make sure that the wife that he loves and the husband can escape to America and be safe. And so the moral of the story was he became a nice person who did the right thing in the right situation to make sure someone was safe. Now, here's what I want to tell you about what was happening at this time. Well, the Americans, they entered World War II in 1941, just like I told you in last lesson. In the year 1939 was when World War I starts, but it's not for 2 more years until America enters the war. And they do that because they decided because the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. Before the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, we didn't want to be in the war. And the Americans decided, we want to be neutral and we don't want anyone to come and bother us about World War II. We want to stay completely out of it. We don't want to have our men to give up their lives and us spend money on the war, and we just want to let Europe fight this whole thing and they can deal with Hitler on their own. Well, when the Japanese bombed us was when we said, okay, well, now we're in this war whether you like it or not. And with our aid, the Allies who were fighting against Hitler were able to win World War II. So before we entered the war, the whole world was asking us to enter the war and to help them to fight Hitler. And so the director of this movie, his name is Michael Curtiz. He made this movie in 1942 after America had made the decision to enter the war. Well, even though America and Congress had decided to enter the war, a lot of people did not like that decision. And because they didn't like that decision, they were kind of resistant to the fact that America had entered the war. And they said, well, we should still be out of it. We should still be neutral, and we shouldn't be helping, and we should just be minding our own business here where we are safe. So Michael Curtiz made this movie and the plot I've just told you to convince Americans this is the right thing to do. So I want you to think about, what are the parallels between the plot of the movie and Rick and his decisions and what actually happened with America entering World War II? Okay, so I've given you a little bit of time to think about that, but basically here's the point. Michael Curtiz made this character, Rick, he made him do the right thing in the end. He made him do this unselfish thing so that way he could give up being cynical and he could do the right thing for other people instead of what he wanted to do that was better for himself. And Michael Curtiz said, if the people in America see this movie, then they will make that connection where they see him doing the right thing and fighting against Hitler and trying to save the husband from Hitler instead of helping himself and saving himself. And so when people would go to see this movie, they would see that and they would see, oh, well, Rick did the right thing, and I think America's doing the right thing with fighting against Hitler and helping innocent people to save them and doing the right thing here, the unselfish thing. So that was the connection with Casablanca. This was our last pop culture item. Now what I have for you is I have video clip number 3 will tell you about the movie Casablanca. It's actually the trailer for the movie. So you'll see Rick and you'll see some of the scenes and it looks very exciting, but of course it's in kind of an older style, so it's black and white and the music is really dramatic. But you'll see Rick, you'll see the wife that he falls in love with again, and then you'll see some of his friends and you'll see the city, and then you'll see kind of the people talking about how great this movie is. So go ahead and pause this movie right now and go ahead and watch video clip number 3. Okay, so here's a really important question. Do you think that you would want to watch the movie Casablanca? I know I kind of spoiled the end of it for you, but it's one of the classic movies in all of history. It's like one of the best movies ever created if you talk to a lot of old film critics. So do you want to watch it? If you do, I'm sure you could find it somewhere. Okay, so we're going to pause for just a second before we jump into our last and final topic with our Utah history tie-in. I want you to know a character called Rosie the Riveter. Well, Rosie the Riveter is pictured in this really famous "We Can Do It" poster. The woman that you're seeing in the poster with her like she's showing off her muscles and her red bandana. She's saying "We can do it," and her name is Rosie the Riveter. Well, at this time, and I kind of told you a little bit about this in the last lesson, but because all the white single men were away from home, well, and they weren't just single, they were dads, they were really anybody in society over the age of 18 that was fit enough, they were all fighting in the war. So all these people left America to be soldiers. And so this created a huge deficit in the workplace. So all these people had to leave their jobs. Well, because they had to leave their jobs, what happened is a lot of people that were minorities who didn't get to have jobs or get to have those kinds of jobs were able to have jobs at this point because all the other men were off fighting in the war. Well, the people that were minorities at this time that really were affected by this were African Americans in society and women. African Americans were not hired because of their race. At this time, America was pretty racist, and they wouldn't hire people because of their race, and they wouldn't hire women. Women were expected to stay home and be wives and be mothers, and while nothing's wrong with that, it just meant that the women didn't have a lot of opportunities. But when World War I came, these people that didn't have opportunities, who were considered second string, they were able to have some jobs. So Rosie the Riveter became an icon for women to have the right to work in the workforce. So this is actually what a riveter is. Her name is Rosie, and the word "the riveter" means her title, like her job. A riveter is the person that rivets. So you're seeing a riveter here. She's drilling the bolts into the side of that metal, and this will be like a plane. So the piece of sheet metal on the side of a planes are held in with the bolts that are then drilled in by what's called a riveter. And so she's doing that, and that's her job. And so this Rosie the Riveter, that was the kind of jobs that women had. Now they could work in the factories and they could produce the kind of machines that they'd never been able to be hired for before this to produce. And so Rosie the Riveter came to represent women in the workplace and women being able to have jobs that they didn't before. And it became a really cool thing. Now this was a very short-lasting thing for minorities because when the men came home from war, they just got their old jobs back, and the women and the black people were fired, unfortunately. It would take many decades for people to realize that minorities should be included in the workplace just as much as the majority, which at this time was white males. But this was the first kind of time we see a movement of minorities coming into the workplace, and this makes a big difference in society. Okay, so what I want you to do is I want you to view video clip number 4. This is a really awesome video from the History Channel. It'll tell you more about Rosie the Riveter, and it'll tell you about who she was, and it'll tell you about her influence later on in the feminist movements a couple decades later. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to talk about our Utah history tie-in. And in order to understand the one thing I wanted you to know about Utah history during World War II, I'm going to teach you about what's called internment camps. This was something that happened during World War II. And I'm going to tell you just the details, just the facts about this time period, and I'm going to tell you what happened. And I want you to be thinking, as I tell you what happened, why you think this would happen, and if this was a right or a wrong thing to do. Was there a reason, and was it a good reason for doing this? Okay, so just like I told you, remember, America enters the war in the year 1941. And when America entered the war, it was because the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. I've told you before that America was completely neutral before 1941. We said we didn't want to fight on either side. We didn't want to fight for Hitler and we didn't want to fight against Hitler. But the Japanese were allied with Germany and with Hitler. When they bombed us, we said, well, now we're in this thing and we need revenge and we need this to be done because the Japanese have brought us in this. So now we're in it, whether you like it or not. So we joined the side against Hitler, against Germany, and against Japan, and fighting with our allies in Europe. So this happened on December 7th, 1941. Well, remember I said that the president at this time was Franklin D. Roosevelt. He was the president during the Great Depression, and he was the president at the start of World War II. He died before World War II ended, but he was the president during most of it. And so in February of the next year in 1942, so 2 months after Pearl Harbor was bombed, FDR signed a law, and this law affected only Japanese Americans. So what a Japanese American is it just means that someone that has Japanese descent, so their ancestors are Japanese, lives in America. So this means that either like their parents were Japanese and moved to America and they were born here, or they are Japanese people who live in America now. So these are American citizens that live in America now, but are from Japanese. Well, the law that FDR signed, it said anyone that is Japanese American that lives in California or parts of Washington, Oregon, and Arizona, they need to pack up their stuff and they need to move to a place. And the place we're going to put them is one of 10 internment camps all around the country. So what the law said is the law said we're going to round up 120,000 Japanese Americans and put them in one of the 10 internment camps around the country. So if you look at the map here, the map shows you where the internment camps were. And we'll talk about what an internment camp is in just a second, but I want you to see that there are 10 all around the nation. There are 2 in California, Idaho, Montana, North Dakota, Wyoming, 1 in Utah. That's kind of our Utah history tie-in, 2 in Arizona, and so on. So what the law said is the law said you have 6 days to pack all your stuff, sell your houses, sell your businesses, settle all your affairs, quit your jobs if you need to, because you are not coming back to your house until the war is done. We'll say in 3 years' time, then maybe you can come back. But we're basically going to say until the war is done, you cannot live in your home right now. You need to come live in these camps. And the camps are in the middle of the desert. So there's no towns around them for miles and miles. It's just in the middle of the desert in a really desolate place. And let me show you a picture of an internment camp. So this is what an internment camp looked like. There would be these really long houses, and like a lot of families would live really cramped into those really long houses. And what they would do is every family would get one room to live in. Sometimes they would have like a curtain in between different families so they could put more people in one house. And then they gave them like a bed and a little furnace, but that was basically it. So whatever they brought with them, that's all the stuff that they had. And they could do things like go to school and things in the internment camps, but one thing they could never do is they could never leave. They couldn't say, oh, I just forgot something at home, I want to go home. Or they couldn't say, I need to go on vacation. Or they couldn't say, okay, I'm going to go to the store somewhere outside the internment camp. They would have to stay there until the president said that they could move back home. And so in the internment camps, they did have things like stores, and they had schools so the kids could go to school and still learn, and they had like dining halls where people could meet and like places they could gather, and some of them had newspapers. But what happened is they also had barbed wire all the way around the internment camp, complete with guards from the army that were sent there to guard the people and make sure they didn't leave. In addition to nobody leaving, nobody could come in. It wasn't like your friend could come and visit you inside the internment camp, your friend from home or anything. They could not leave. They also read all their mail. So before your family could get their mail, the guard would have to read it and make sure there was nothing suspicious. So this is what happened to these people. And the law said you have to live here for at least 3 years, and we'll decide again if we want you still here. But we're basically saying until the war ends is as long as you have to live here. So I've told you kind of the background information, and I want you to think, why would they do this? Okay, so maybe you thought, well, we just went to war against Japan, and these are Japanese Americans. There's a connection there, and there is. So there was some fear in the government that if we let Japanese Americans just live their regular lives in America, then they might be spies for Japan against us. So the question is this a real fear that they needed to have? Is this the right or the wrong thing to do to these people at this time? Well, I'm going to show you a picture, and this picture is drawn by a very famous cartoonist, and then we're going to come back to that question. The cartoonist is someone that I know that all of you know about, and you all have read his books, I guarantee you. The cartoonist is Dr. Seuss. So he wrote all those books like Hop on Pop and Green Eggs and Ham and Red Fish, Blue Fish, and all those different kids' books. And he drew like the very iconic cartoons. Well, you may not know this, but Dr. Seuss wrote and illustrated a lot of children's stories, but he also was very active politically, which means that he drew a lot of political cartoons and had a lot to say about politics. Well, Dr. Seuss was in favor of these internment camps. He said, yes, this is totally something the president should be doing at this time, and he should be very scared about these Japanese Americans. And I want to show you the cartoon, one of the cartoons that Dr. Seuss drew. Now, I do want to tell you that this cartoon is very racist. So the way he's drawing these people is a racist way to draw people that isn't okay. It just means that he's exaggerating their features and their caricatures, which is not an okay way to draw someone. So I want to make that very clear before I show you the comic. Okay, so I want you to take a minute and look at what you're seeing here. What is his message with this comic? And then what I want you to do is, if you need to, I want you to pause the video so you can continue to look at this, and then we'll talk about it. Okay, so perhaps that is enough time for you to look. If you need some more time, just go ahead and pause this video and look at what he's saying is happening. Now you can see that this is not an okay way to draw someone. He drew someone very racist, which isn't okay. So what he's doing is he's showing a crowd of Japanese people from Washington, Oregon, California, all coming together. And there's someone in the house that says Honorable Fifth Column. That's the name of the Japanese troops. There's someone in the house that's giving out TNT to these people that are coming from those states. And there's someone up above who has an eyeglass who's looking towards the sea. Now, what's across the ocean that way? Well, it's the country of Japan. So, and then the text at the top says, waiting for the signal from home. So what he's saying, well, these people, their loyalty lies to Japan and to their home, and they're waiting until their home country tells them what to do. Now, this was Dr. Seuss's opinion, but let me tell you some actual facts. Dr. Seuss and FDR did not act on any actual facts when they felt this way. They feared this would be the outcome, but no one actually said, yeah, there actually are Japanese spies here in America before they decided to make this decision. Some of the facts I want you to know are this: 33,000 Japanese Americans that were taken to these internment camps. So remember, there's 120,000 that are taken to the camps. 33,000 of those men, they actually fought for the U.S. in World War II. This meant that those men, that their families were rounded up and taken to the internment camps, they left to go fight for America against Japan and against Hitler in World War II, and their families were in these internment camps. So these are the families of soldiers and of soon-to-be veterans that America decided to lock up. And they didn't let their families go just because their dad was fighting for America. They said, no, you need to stay here too. Is that fair? These are actual soldiers fighting for America that have not fought for Japan against America, but they're saying we need your families to stay here in these camps. Now, there has never ever been any proof that any of these people were spies. Not one document has surfaced from World War II until today that said any of these people were spies. There was no evidence at that time, and there has not been any evidence uncovered that anyone was a spy for Japan against America. These were Americans on American soil who felt patriotic towards America and loved America. That the government said, we're going to round you up and put you in these camps because of your race. That is the definition of doing something racist, is saying, oh, because of your race, this is how you are. That is never okay to assume about someone. And then the last thing I want you to know is that none of them were ever convicted of any crimes. These were not people who were criminals. These were regular Americans that the government said, because of your race, we're going to put you here and you need to stay here and we don't trust you because of your race. And you are American citizens, but we don't care about that. I hope you can hear that I feel really strongly that this was not something that the government did with evidence, and this is something that they acted in fear about. But I do want you to think about, do you think that this is okay to fear this? Do you blame them for thinking that this is something that's okay to do? Or do you think that they should have waited till they had evidence? There's a lot of questions that this problem brings up, and I want you to think about whether you think this was the right or the wrong decision to make. So I do want to tell you the end of the story. Eventually what happens is many decades later, Ronald Reagan, he was the president in the 80s, so it's about 4 decades after the war has ended. He signed a bill that said to the Japanese Americans and to their families, we're sorry that this happened, because guess what? When the internment camps ended and the people had to go back home, many of them could not go back to their homes because sometimes their homes were destroyed and their businesses were destroyed because people said, oh, those Japanese Americans are bad, and they vandalized their homes and destroyed their homes. And then a lot of these people couldn't get jobs, and many of them were homeless. So a lot of those soldiers who came back with their families from war, having just fought for America, they ended up homeless on the streets because nobody would give them a job because of their race. So what this did is it created a lot of anti-Japanese sentiment in the nation. And these people were harmed for decades after this. And then, so eventually, Ronald Reagan, he said, okay, well, we'll just give all these people that are still alive 40 years later, we'll give them money. And so the government did decide to say, we're sorry, this shouldn't have happened, and you can have some money. So another question with that is, do you think, if you are against this, do you think that that was okay? The government said that. It was 40 years later. Did it really make a difference? They said it was not okay? And those are some very interesting questions we need to ask ourselves. Now, here's our Utah history tie-in. Just like I said before, there was an internment camp here, and it was located in Topaz, Utah. Topaz is just like a little bit like an hour or so away from Provo. So we have here in Ogden, there's us. You can look at the map. There's Salt Lake City, there's Sandy, Provo, and then it's like a little bit south west of that area in the middle of the desert. And this is a picture of Topaz. So we had one of these internment camps here in Utah, and we have to think about, was this an okay thing that we had an internment camp here and these people had to live here in these camps because of their race until the war was over? Okay, so what I want you to do right now is I want you to watch video clip number 5. What video clip number 5 will do is it will show you some of the internment camps, and it'll tell you some really good information. Some of it will be a repeat of what I told you, but some of it will be new to you. So I want you to pause the video right now, and I want you to watch video clip number 5. Okay, now what we're going to do is you have an assignment. For your assignment, you have 2 questions I want you to answer. Number 1 says, what do you think about the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II? Was this act justified? Why or why not? The word justified means, did they have a good enough reason to do the internment of Japanese Americans? And then tell me your reasoning. For number 1, I want you to write at least a paragraph because there's a lot I want you to think about and talk about here. Then number 2 says, what can be done to prevent something like this from happening again to a certain race of people. And I want you to write me a couple sentences for number 2. Now, I want to repeat that one more time. Number 1 needs to be a paragraph, but number 2 can just be a couple sentences long. So I need you to make sure that you are doing that. If you are not, you will lose some points. So that's what your assignment is for today, is to make sure that you're telling me your thoughts about Japanese internment camps and what you think about whether or not this was okay for America to do this.